of you that don't know me, I'm Mike Hussey. I've been a member of Stedman Baptist Church for going on 20 years now. Just going to give a little bit of testimony of what God has done through to me and for my family through the times of time. I grew up as a non-church going family. It's not that we didn't believe, we just didn't go to church. So for most of my life, I didn't know what tithing was about. As we began attending Stedman Baptist Church and going on a regular basis, just looking around when the offering plate came by, we would reach in our pockets and think, well, what do I have? Whether it was $5 or $10 or $20, we were just giving cash. We really didn't know what that was going to. We didn't know what it meant to tithe. So we were giving what we could give. And, understanding about what the tithe goes to is a big part of that. And there's probably many of you out there that don't know what that goes to. Through listening to sermons from the pastor and reading scriptures about tithing, we understood that it was going to the church ministries, to our church salaries. But things of the everyday life of the church that we were supporting. So it was not until that time that we started becoming more faithful in our giving. At first it was challenging. There was times when we thought, well, we can't afford to give. We're scraping by we had 2 kids. We're scraping by on every paycheck. Fortunately for me, I have a loving wife that is very frugal. She scrapes, scratches. She should be the one up here, because if we were giving on my $40 a week or my minimal allowance, we wouldn't be making. But the Lord had provided us with those offerings through couponing, through scraping and giving, sacrificing, going out to eat. We can save that money, and we have to give that money first before we do anything else. That's God's money. We have to give Him His part first. As I said, it was very challenging. We could come up with any excuse that we wanted not to tithe. Well, we got this bill, we got that bill, we've got people that had to go to the hospital, they had to go to the doctor. Carol was diagnosed with breast cancer. Bills were piling up, but yet we still became faithful. Every time we found ourselves wondering where we were going to get that money, the Lord provided. We would get a check for some unknown reason. He would give we were truly blessed with everything that was happening because we were faithful. It's easy not to be faithful when we miss a Sunday. It's easy to say, well, I missed that Sunday. We're still faithful with our giving. It's important that if the church is closed for the hurricane or for snow, that we still give to the funding of our church, for our ministries, because the church still goes on. We're called to give at least 10%. That's the minimum. What we have found through these things that we've scraped and struggled with, that we can give over and above that for the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, for Operation Christmas Child that's just coming up. There's always room to give up. Don't think that you just can give monetary. Time is a big offering to the Lord. You can serve in many different ways. We can give in many different opportunities. There's opportunities all around. We just have to look for them. The Lord will bless you. He's blessed our family over and above what we can expect. My 2 boys are experiencing that, and it's important to teach our children at a young age the importance of giving. As I said, I grew up not knowing about giving. How many years of blessings did I miss because I was unable to give, or I didn't know what to give? Give your time, give your service, and most of all, give that hope to those who are out there that are lost, because there's so many out there in these communities that are lost. So that's just a little bit about what the Lord has done for our family. I know that if you will be faithful in your giving, He'll bless you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Please take your Bibles and turn to the third book of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. Today we'll be looking at chapter 27, Leviticus 27, verse 30. Leviticus, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, chapter 27, verse 30. Because this is God's Word, and it is infallible and inerrant. We join standing to honor the reading of God's Word. Thus all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or of the fruit of the tree is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. Please be seated. Back in 1980, I took a course from a certified financial planner in Fort Worth, Texas, where Beverly and I were in school. And that heightened my interest in investing, and he taught me some basics that I did not know before. Those were the days when money market interest rates were anywhere between 15 and 20%, and you could invest in a money market mutual fund and get high double-digit returns. Of course, that didn't last for very long, but it got me interested. But these various years, the 30 or 40 years since that time, there's something I found that's much more interesting than that and much more joyous than that, and that is to learn to invest in the work of the Lord, because the returns are out of this world. And that's what I want to continue to share with you today. This is the fifth in a series of 6 sermons on investing for long-term gain, investing in the Lord's work. I thank the Lord for Mike and the other brothers who shared with us. It's one thing for me to preach God's Word to you, and then it's another thing for you to hear that these brothers have applied it into the lives of their family, and it has made a difference for them. And I thank each one of them. Today we're going to talk about a starting place for giving. If you go to a money manager, a financial consultant, a certified financial planner, he or she will tell you that the most important thing is to get started. Begin doing it. Many people never get started planning for retirement, and they end up in retirement and all they have is Social Security, and that's not enough. Many people never begin investing for their children's college education, so when it comes time to go to college, they just not enough. It is there, but God in His mercy still provides. But it's very important for us to look at a starting place for giving. Some of you have heard of a man named Sam Houston. To the amazement of everyone, Sam Houston, who was a colorful soldier and politician, he came to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And after his baptism, Houston said he wanted to make a sizable contribution to the church. And when someone asked him why, he replied, "Well, my pocketbook was baptized too." It's true that the Christian life is inseparable from giving. But you may be wondering, where do I start? Well, Mike gave us the answer to that, and the starting place is giving a tithe. That's the logical place where God started His people under the Old Covenant. We read in our text for today that a tithe of all they received from working the land belonged to the Lord. It was holy unto Him. Just what does that word tithe mean? We talk about it some, but we're not sure that all of us know what it means. It means a 10th part. The Israelites were to give 10% back to the Lord. There were also free will offerings, but the 10% was mandatory. Proverbs 3:9 says, "Honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of your produce." So God's children are to give to Him first, off the top, not the last. And when God's children were not giving as they should, then God asks them in Malachi 3:8 through 10, "Will a man rob God? Yet you're robbing me." You say, "How are we robbing you in tithes and offerings? You're cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and test me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I'll not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. Now, some people try to argue, and some unsuccessfully, that the New Testament does not teach tithing, but it actually does. Jesus validated this mandatory tithing even on small things in Matthew 23, verse 23. And I encourage you to look that up when you go home. After that reference in the New Testament, every single example of giving in the New Testament goes far beyond 10% or a tithe. A number of years ago, we did a demographic study of the people within 5 miles of this building. And one of the facts we discovered was that if the average income of people in our church is the same as the average income of people in our community, then our people as a whole are giving about 5% of their income, or half a tithe, to the work of the Lord. The problem with that is that tithing is not the ceiling of giving. Tithing is the floor of giving. Tithing is a good place to start, but it's a bad place to stop. Tithing is God's historical method to get us on the road of giving. It serves as a gateway to the joy of grace giving. Malachi says that the Israelites robbed God by giving God less than a tithe. And many of us are robbing God today, if that demographic study was correct a few years ago. Now, in response to this, some folks will say, okay, I'll grant you that, but we need to take this gradually. We'll start with 5% and then we'll work our way up to a tithe. But that is like saying, I used to rob 6 banks a year, but this year, by God's grace, I'll only rob 3. The point is that Malachi is making here is not to rob God less, but not to rob God at all. I had a woman at a church in Rocky Mount, a very godly woman, who I was serving there back in the 70s, and she told me that as long as she tithed to the Lord's work, that she could spend the other 90% exactly the way she wanted to. Well, she was wrong. The remaining 90% is also God's, and you and I are accountable to Him for how we spend that and how we use it. As we learned for the poor widow who gave her pennies in the temple courts, God not only looks at what we give, but He also looks at what we keep. There are many people in God's kingdom who began to tithe, and then they watched how God provided for them. Years later, some of these folks are giving 60 to 90% of their incomes to the Lord's work. I was in the presence of a Lutheran pastor back in around 1976 from Minnesota. And I remember him talking about a couple in his church. I think it was his daughter and his son-in-law who were examples of this. Now, she was a nurse and he was an attorney, and they gave all of his salary as an attorney to the Lord's work, and they lived on her salary as a nurse. Now, what you will find is that if you give to God what you owe Him first, then you'll receive His blessings to help you pay what you owe to other human beings. However, when you rob God to pay human beings, then you're robbing yourselves of God's blessings. No wonder you don't have enough money. Because you're in a vicious cycle of robbing God. And the only way to get out of that cycle is through obedient faith. Now, if you say you cannot afford to tithe, then allow me to ask you a question. If your income was reduced by 10% this week, would you die? If you say no, then you have admitted that you can afford to tithe. It's just that you do not want to. Now, I'm not telling you that it's easy to begin tithing, but I am saying, and there are multitudes of people, those brothers you have heard testify these last several weeks, and people, all this congregation will tell you that it is much easier to live on 90% of your income inside the will of God than it is to live on 100% of your income outside of the will of God. So that's the beginning. But secondly, I want to share with you today, and it's a biblical example of this, is giving that abounds. In 2 Corinthians 8:7, Paul said, "See that you abound in this gracious work." And to what was Paul referring? He was referring to giving to the Lord's work. And he was using the Macedonians as role models of people who were giving, actually to the point who were abounding in their giving. Verses 2 through 3 of that same chapter tell us that in a great ordeal of affliction and great poverty, they gave beyond their ability. Well, just what does it mean to give beyond your ability? It means pushing your giving past the point where the figures add up. It means giving when the bottom line says you cannot. That is giving that abounds. But then thirdly, let's examine giving that empties. When you and I die, we will be emptied of all our possessions. Where will they go? To whom will they go? It is important that we have a will. It is important that we do estate planning. Because otherwise, the government will dictate where your financial resources go, and the government will dictate to whom your financial resources go. In your estate planning, I challenge you to give heavily to the work of the Lord. Death is the end of your opportunities to give, but you can give in such a way that it will last for eternity. My mother began a scholarship at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, where I graduated, and she started an endowed scholarship there, and many of our family members continue to give to it year after year. And it benefits seminary students who are on limited budgets, who some of them cannot afford to enroll for the next semester, but this is an endowed scholarship that will give and help those students. And that scholarship is in perpetuity. Long after I've gone to be with the Lord by His grace, that scholarship, 500 years from now, if the Lord doesn't come, is going to continue to be giving to seminary students who are at the point of poverty. That's the way you and I can give, and it can last forever and ever and ever. And certainly, God does reward acts of faithful giving while we're still living. But we also need to examine the worthiness of any organization to whom we give. In fact, financial advisor Ron Blue is right when he says, do your giving while you're living so you're knowing where it's going. John Wesley made this great statement. He said, money never stays with me. It would burn me if it did. I throw it out of my hands as soon as possible, lest it should find its way into my heart. Wesley earned significant royalties from the writing of books that he wrote during his lifetime. Yet his goal was to give so generously as to leave virtually nothing behind when he died. And he achieved that goal. When Wesley died, he had little or nothing left, because he had given it all away to the work of the Lord and the people in need. Now, while that money that he had value, but he traded in his earthly money for treasures in heaven. When Jesus comes again, what's going to happen to all the money sitting presently in bank accounts and in brokerages and retirement programs and estates? What's going to happen to all that? Well, it's going to burn up like wood and hay and straw when it could have been given in exchange for gold and silver and other precious stones. Financial resources that could have been used to feed hungry people, that could have been used to fulfill the Great Commission, when Jesus comes again, are going to go up in smoke. Now maybe maybe you played one of those card games where the winner is the one who runs out of cards first. At the end of the game, every card you have counts against you. The American dream is to die with as many cards in your hand as is possible. But that is actually backwards, according to what the Bible says. The biblical strategy is like that of John Wesley, to not get stuck with all those cards or all that money at the end of your life. Now, fourthly, I want to talk about giving to our children. Are we supposed to leave our children all of our money when we die? The biblical answer to that is no. It is absolutely fine to leave for them a modest amount, enough to assist them in a modest way, but not enough to change their lifestyles or to undercut their dependence on the Lord. Leaving a large inheritance to your children or to my children is both a missed opportunity to invest in the kingdom of God and is rarely in the best interest of our children. During my years in the ministry, I've heard countless horror stories over inheritance left by parents to children and how it ruined the lives of those children, how it divided those children in their relationships to each other. For instance, leaving money to a child who is a careless spender is like throwing gasoline on the fire. And absolutely nothing divides your children more quickly than a large inheritance. Leaving more to God's kingdom and less to children who are financially independent is not only an act of love toward God, but it's also an act of love toward our children. In the Old Testament times, leaving children an inheritance was important. Why was it important? Because children many times could not afford to buy their own land and would end up enslaved or would end up unable to care for their parents. That's not usually the case today. Andrew Carnegie was quoted as saying, "The almighty dollar bequeathed to a child is an almighty curse. No man has the right to handicap his son with such a burden as great wealth." You and I should help our children know what it is to work hard. We should teach them a work ethic. And we should help them to experience also the joy of trusting in the Lord. It is much more important to leave our children a spiritual inheritance than it is, and a spiritual heritage, than it is to leave them an inheritance. Let God lead you as an individual on how much to provide for your children. The money God has given you to manage does not belong to your children. It belongs to God. And remember, God is the owner of every bit of money and every financial resource we have. He is the owner. We are the managers of it. So let me ask you a question. If you invest your money with a money manager, what would you think? This is your money. If you invest your money with a money manager, what would you think if at your death he gave all of your money to his children? What do you think God thinks when he has invested money with us and we are his money manager, and instead of giving his money to his children as a whole, we just keep it and only give it to our children? Do you think he's pleased with that? He's no more pleased with that than we would be if our money manager or our financial investor investment manager gave all our money at our death to his children. And then fifthly, let's look at giving from God's provisions, because that's where it comes. In Luke 6:38, Jesus said, "Give, and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return." So Jesus is saying that the more you give, the more will come back to you. Why? Because God is the greatest giver in the universe, and He absolutely will not allow you or me to outgive Him. There's a holy pride there. He's not going to let you or me outgive Him. Go ahead and try. I dare you. Try to outgive the Lord. See what will happen. He won't let you outgive Him. Some of you enjoy earth-moving machines. I have 2 grandsons who absolutely love earth-moving machines. Well, a man named R.G. Letourneau invented earth-moving machines. He was a Christian who came to the point of giving away 90%. You heard it right. He gave away 90% of his income to the Lord's work. Yet, when he did that, the money came in faster than he could give it away. Here's what he said. This is a quote. "I shovel it out, and God shovels it back, but God has a bigger shovel." Yes, giving is a sacrifice. And sometimes we're going to feel that sacrifice. God's payoff is very real, but it comes in due time, which may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but for sure, at least it will be in eternity. And those investments will pay off forever and ever and ever. You and I may not be rich, at least we don't think we are, but in comparison to people in third world countries, we actually are wealthy. We actually are rich. And God has given us, in comparison to most people in the world, He's given us considerable material blessings. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why God has given you so much in comparison to people in other countries who are living in abject poverty? Why has God given you and me so much? You and I do not need to wonder. The answer to that is in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 11. Where Paul tells us exactly why God provides us with more money than we actually need. And the answer is for all liberality. In other words, He gives us what we have so that we can be generous on every occasion to others in need or to the Lord's work. God provides us with more money than we need. Not so that you and I can find more ways to spend it, and not so that we can indulge ourselves, and not so that we can spoil our children. He gives us more than we need so that we can give to His work and to people in need generously. When God provides you a raise in salary, or maybe provides you with an unexpected gift, or maybe provides you with an inheritance, and you and I often think, we all do, what a blessing. And the wheels of our minds start turning, well, what can I do with this? How can I spend it? What can I get I've been wanting? Well, just remember, when that happens, God has given that to you to test you, to see what you'll do with it. God, as the owner of all that we have, is generous. And He doesn't demand that you and I live in poverty. He does not resent us from making reasonable expenditures upon ourselves. But suppose that you and I are spending money on luxuries, buying only designer clothes.